So, hey everyone, welcome to a brand new monthly series here at RCNV, where we'll be chatting with amazing community members doing meaningful work in and around our community. Today, I'm super excited to introduce Kazu Haga, educator, author, and longtime advocate for nonviolence and community transformation. And yeah, let's get into it. So, I'm really excited about the book talk coming up on fierce vulnerability. I have it right here. And the one piece that I wanted to maybe hone in on is your concept around accountability.
Mm.
And I really appreciated the formula you gave to accountability, which is insight plus remorse plus amends. And I was wondering if you could take some time to expand on those pieces.
Yeah, no, I think it's really important that we come to some shared understanding about what we mean by accountability, because so often when we engage in nonviolence, it's an attempt to try to bring about accountability, right? Like there's injustice, some people, some corporations, some state actors, whatever, is abusing their power, and so there needs to be accountability there. But one of the things that I oftentimes talk about is, accountability and punishment are not the same things, right? They're completely polar opposite things. And in all of the work that I've done, particularly with incarcerated people who have committed real acts of real harm, it's watching their healing journeys that has taught me what true accountability means and looks like. And I've learned from them that accountability is not something you can shove down someone's throat, right? It's something that they need to want to do on their own. And
Mm,
I oftentimes talk about how when we talk about holding people accountable, the key word shouldn't even be accountable. It should be holding. Like, what does it mean to hold space for people to move through their own process of accountability? Because going through a process of accountability is actually part of the healing journey for the person that caused the harm, not just for the person that received it, right? And so the insight plus remorse plus amends piece is about if I cause harm, the first thing I need to do is to have insight into what are the conditioning in my life, what are the things that I've been through in my life that have created the person that I am in that moment, that made the choices that I did that ended up causing somebody harm, right? Like if I don't understand what happened in my life, what is the karma of that moment, all of the conflict, the history of the conflict, the unhealed trauma that I brought to that relationship in that moment that caused harm, then how can I hold myself accountable when I don't even understand why I did the things that I did, right? So giving people space to have some introspection to really understand why they did what they did, and then feeling a sense of genuine remorse, like really understanding the impact that my words, that my actions had on somebody, and feeling genuine remorse for that. And then out of that remorse, a desire to make amends. Right? Like when harm happens, when fracture happens, sometimes there are some things that can never be repaired, that can never be replaced.
mm,
But out of that remorse, a genuine desire to repair what I can, right? And if those three elements aren't present, I feel like real accountability can't really happen.
mm.
And so, I think accountability is an important word that we throw out all the time, but I think it's really important that we slow down and really understand. And when we say we want someone to be accountable, what do we actually mean by that?
Mm. Yeah, I really like this reframing that you just shared around looking at accountability as holding space because I sense a lot of compassion even in that. And I'm wondering, even with the piece around insight, you shared that insight is about holding space. So almost like remorse can come up so
Yeah.
that they can feel into that. Yeah, and you brought up David and you brought up David's story, and I was wondering if you can share a bit about that.
Yeah, David was an incarcerated man who I met in San Quentin State Prison, who was serving a life sentence for a homicide that he had committed. And he at the time he was living in the streets. He was unsheltered, was battling addiction, and he told me that he had been it started to get cold, and so he hasn't slept well the last couple of nights, and he hadn't gotten high for a couple of days, so he was really agitated, and he really wanted a roof to sleep under. So he decided to rob a car and to sleep inside the car. And so he went up to a family that was in the parking lot of a fast food restaurant, and he pointed the gun and demanded that they get out of the car. And the driver hesitated or flinched or did something, and he ended up shooting the person in the car and killing him. And is 20 years later was still serving a life sentence for it. And if you had asked him, it's like, well, why did you do that? What's your insight? Why he could have told you, well, like I was addicted to drugs, I was homeless, I was cold, I just wanted a place to sleep. But that wasn't real insight, right? That like for him, real insight came when we slowed down and actually asked him, who are you? Right? And what are the things that happened in your life that led to that moment? And unpacked the reality that he was a black man who grew up in poverty in the United States of America. Not only had he known a lifetime of violence, but his ancestors had known 500 years of poverty and incarceration and violence. And all of that was a part of his story, right? And that's not for him to like escape the responsibility for what he did, but it's to understand that these individual instances happen within the context of much greater forms of violence. And there's a beautiful quote from transformative justice activist Mariam Kaba who says, nobody enters violence for the first time by committing it. And for David, like him pulling that trigger was not the first time he had been a part of violence, right? Violence had been done to him and his family and his ancestors for generations. And helping him understand that all of that is a part of his story, I think helps him reclaim his full humanity, not just as the murderer, but also as the survivor of hundreds of years of oppression. And that's also part of who he is. And I think if we see him only as a murderer, it's easy for him to get defensive. But if
Mhm.
we can accept the totality of who he is, there's a lot more space for him to actually go into the remorse and really understand the impact. And so, yeah, the importance of leading with compassion and curiosity and understanding a person not just for the worst thing that they did in their lives, but for the totality of who they are.
Mhm. Yeah, I really like that example you brought up with Thich Nhat Hanh, and almost the paper is the cloud, and touched on that it's not just the paper you're looking at. There's so many elements that create this paper, and they're not gone. They're still there. Oh.
Yeah, it's one of his most famous poems. He says that he takes out a piece of paper and he says, if you're a poet, you can see that this is not a paper, that it's a cloud. Because without clouds, there's no rain, and without rain, there are no trees, and without trees, there's no paper. And then it really speaks to the deep interdependence of all phenomena, that this paper wouldn't exist without the sun and the rain and the clouds, and that every moment is interdependent with all other moments that came before it and the moments that will come after it. And so the moment that David pulled the trigger is deeply interdependent with all of the moments in his life that came before it, right? As well as all the moments of just the systems of injustice that have come before that moment.
Yeah, you have this line in the book. I wanted to read it. Self-compassion wasn't meant to evade his own responsibility, but to honor his full story.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
Mm, mm. Yeah, and I think there's more to share around fractals because I hear that when we talk about interconnectedness or interdependence. And do you mind just touching on fractals in
Yeah.
this context? Mhm.
Yeah, so I've really come to believe that the universe that we live in exists on fractals. They're built in fractals, right? So the things that are happening to us at the smallest scale are also happening to us at the largest scale. The laws of physics that govern the smallest particles also govern the largest things in the cosmos, right? And I think if that's the case, that we live in a universe of fractals, then it only makes sense that the laws that govern our relationship to harm and to trauma and to oppression and to healing also exists on fractals. And
Mhm.
so much of the work of fierce vulnerability is about understanding like the lessons that I have learned from my own individual trauma healing journey and
Mhm.
the lessons I've learned from healing relationships with my family. We can take those lessons and extrapolate them into social change movements and help us understand that the work of social change movements is about healing our relationships as a species, right? And healing our species relationships with the earth. And all of the science that we understand about trauma healing, all of the beautiful modalities that we developed around trauma healing, all of that can happen at scale. And so, like, on an interpersonal level, I feel like in a lot of progressive spaces and a lot of movement spaces, we've committed to practices of restorative justice, right? Like, we know that when someone community commits harm, it doesn't do us any good to just cast them out of society and lock them up in a cell and throw away the key and say, you don't belong here anymore. And yet, in a lot of our activist spaces, when we organize movements, we still are actually motivated by this carceral logic that says if we beat those people over there, then our people over here will receive justice. And I don't think that's how healing works. I think if our intention is the healing of our relationship, the healing of our species, then we need to take those same principles that apply in my own trauma healing and my relational trauma healing work and understand that like I will never be whole until my family is whole. Like as long as my sisters, my mother, they're still struggling, I will never be free. It is a delusion that I live in, this idea of individual liberation. There's no such thing as individual liberation in an interdependent world. And I think we just need to take that understanding and continue to extrapolate them into mass. And even when we're going up against officers and police officers, life officers, whatever it might be, the things that they are doing are horrific and they need to stop immediately. But how do we move with an understanding that until even those people are free, our communities will never be free?
Mm. Yeah, and I hear, and you mentioned this earlier in the book too, how when we can't address our own shadows, how do we do that bigger work, in movement spaces? And I love this idea that, and correct me if I'm wrong, what I'm hearing is when it comes to fractals and these patterns, it can feel so overwhelming to see the big picture. But when you can start in your own communities,
Yeah.
and take those lessons, you can apply that same way of thinking or living to a much bigger system. Is that right?
Yeah, like, if we think about like, okay, how do we heal the world? How do we do racial healing work? Like, how do we heal the relationship between white folks on this land and indigenous folks on this land? Like, those are such big questions that it's really hard to grasp. But and it's not that like healing the relationship between me and my sister or whatever is easy, right? Healing, we all know that healing the stuff in our family is oftentimes the hardest thing to do, but it's much easier to grasp. And not only is it easier for us to grasp, but there's science behind it. There are so many different modalities of healing, whether we're talking about, internal family systems or reevaluation counseling or whatever. There's all of these modalities that exist that can help us heal as individuals and as relationships and families. And all of those same lessons can apply. So I think the more we can understand in our bodies, oh, this is what it takes for me to heal, this is what it takes for my family to heal, then I think it'll become easier and easier to understand, oh, this is what it's going to take for our human family to heal.
Yeah, and I'm wondering on that note, I guess I'm inspired to ask, like, what comes to mind for you in a step towards that collective healing?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of thoughts that come to mind. One is several years ago at Standing Rock, I think this was 2016, was it? I don't know. When we're at Standing Rock, there was this ceremony that happened where dozens and dozens of US Army veterans went to Standing Rock and bent down on one knee and like from the depths of their hearts offered a sincere apology to indigenous elders there for all of the harm that the US military had committed to indigenous peoples over hundreds and hundreds of years. And obviously the veterans there, they themselves were not responsible for committing some of those atrocities, but they knew that the institutions that they represented and had sacrificed so much for were responsible for that. And I think those kinds of opportunities for like intergenerational healing, like I know when I caused harm, so much of the healing can come from, again, when I can feel that remorse And when I can let go of any fear that I might have that if I own up to this harm, I'm going to be cast out of society or whatever, and genuinely say, I'm sorry. And not only am I sorry, but I'm here to put my body on the line to protect your sacred lands now. I think healing can happen. Like I know that when I've caused harm, there's been times when I've had to like really humble myself and offer deep apology, and healing has happened. I know that I've witnessed that on the interpersonal level. So what does that look like at the social scale? And also just knowing that, when I'm in a conflict with someone on an individual level, one of my initial responses is like, I want to prove why I'm right and they're wrong. But I know that that tactic only escalates things. And if I can just let down my guard and either apologize for the things that I need to apologize for, or if I feel hurt by something that the other person did, to speak from a place of impact. Hey, I'm reaching out to you because this thing that you did really hurt me and it placed a fracture in our relationship. And I miss the relationship that we can no longer have because of that. And I'm trying to find a way to reconnect with you. That's a much more healing conversation. It's a conversation that is much more likely to bring about reconciliation. And so, as we engage with nonviolent direct action, as we engage with resistance to state violence, is there a way that we can lead not with this energy of we are here to shut things down because you all are evil, but is there a way that we can lead with a different message, speaking about our impact and the vision for the future that we want to have, and inviting whether it's politicians or ICE agents, inviting them back into their full humanity, right? Inviting them back into the beloved community that we are trying to build.
Hmm.
I think those are some of the things that I'm thinking about. How do we bring that kind of worldview more and more into movement work?
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, and we've touched on this before, and we may not be able to get into it in depth. Yeah, I really liked how you brought up the two hands of nonviolence, and I just hear that from what you're sharing now. One being the hand of openness, and also like resistance to injustice. Is that right when it comes to the two hands?
Yeah, the Two Hands of Nonviolence is a famous piece of writing from a feminist thinker, nonviolent activist named Barbara Demings. And yeah, that's exactly right. And I think oftentimes when people think about nonviolence, some people think nonviolence is just about the open hand and it's just about being compassionate. It's just about loving all people. And we forget that so much of the legacy of nonviolence is about this fierce resistance that has the capacity to mobilize power to stop injustice and to organize and demand dignity, right? But also, there's a lot of people who hear the word nonviolence and they think it's just about the protests, it's just about the civil disobedience. And we forget that if we're engaged in the work of nonviolence, we also have to remember to have compassion and dignity for all people and to remind ourselves that at the end of the day, we are trying to work for the liberation of all people, right? Not just the people on our side.
Yeah, this just touches back to what we're starting with is just accountability and breaking that down and to really feel into our hurt to make amends. And you brought up amends, and maybe this would be a good ending point because I want to hear more clarity on the idea of amends. But you shared accountability isn't something you take, it's something you give. Accountability requires the person who caused harm to actually give something to try to repair as much of the harm as they can. It's about getting to a place where they want to make amends. Yeah, so I love this idea. I'm wondering if you can maybe help us see amends more clearly.
Yeah, so I am in pretty deep community with several white folks who come from inherited wealth, and they've committed their lives to reparations work. Like I have one friend who literally redistributed every penny that she had inherited from generations and generations of wealth. And I think for a lot of them, not only are they able to actually sit with the remorse of the pain that their ancestors caused and to really allow themselves to grieve it, but they know that the work of redistributing the wealth that came from that violence is not something that they're doing out of a sense of obligation or a sense of guilt or anything like that. but it's part of their healing journey. And it's not just like their healing, but it's healing the pain of their ancestors. I think there's an understanding that when you oppress other people, it does something to fracture your own soul.
Mm-hmm.
And when you are able to oppress other people, you are removing yourself from the interwoven web of relationships of life, right? By saying that I can hurt those people over there. Well, if those people are over here, then I'm all the way over there, and I'm not in deep interdependent relationship with them. And so it fractures you, right? To cause harm to other people, to live in a worldview that says I can oppress those people over there and somehow I'll benefit from that. And so I think the like true amends is about understanding that me doing whatever I can to offer repair, whether it's in the form of financial reparations or anything else, putting your bodies on the line to protect marginalized communities, that's not something you're doing to save those people. It's actually something that you're doing for your own healing as well, and the healing of your ancestors and the healing of relationships between your ancestors and the ancestors of the people that they harm, right? And so, I think oftentimes, again, within crowds of nonviolence who think nonviolence is just about loving people, that piece around amends and the importance of making reparations and for there to be repair in that sense oftentimes gets missed out. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and so I think amends and a true understanding of accountability is a prerequisite to healing, right? Like healing can't happen unless there is that desire to make amends.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, yes, thank you, Kazu. Yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing more how this healing work can come to the forefront of true change. And I'm just grateful that we can share space later this week at the book talk and training. And yeah, I'm grateful for this talk, so thank you.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing you in person.